"Your father is going to lose everything," Lena announced abruptly, her penetrating eyes fixed on me from across the dinner table. The words hung in the air like a ticking time bomb. I felt the blood drain from my face as my fork clattered onto the plate, the sound echoing against the sudden, suffocating silence. Derek coughed awkwardly, clearing his throat as he shot Lena a withering look. "Now, sweetheart, what kind of thing is that to say?" Lena ignored him, her hazel eyes boring into mine with that uncanny, unnerving intensity I'd grown both used to and perturbed by. "He's been lying and hiding things. Bad things." My heart slammed against my ribs as Derek scoffed unconvincingly. "Come on, Elise, you're not going to listen to her weird games again, are you?" I swallowed hard, my throat constricting as dread and panic welled up inside me. This wasn't one of Lena's make-believe stories or idle ramblings. I could tell from the grave certainty etched on her delicate features. "What are you talking about, Lena?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. She fixed me with that soul-piercing stare. "Dad is cheating on you and stealing from his job. He's going to get caught soon." A shocked silence fell over the room. Derek pushed back his chair and stood abruptly, his face mottled with anger. "That's enough, young lady. You've got an overactive imagination, but this is going too far." "I'm telling the truth," Lena shouted back, her voice trembling with emotion. "You think I'm making this up, but I see things. I know what you've been doing." Frozen in shock, I could only watch numbly as Derek grabbed Lena by the arm and hauled her out of the room, her cries and protests fading down the hallway. The bubble of our seemingly perfect suburban life had well and truly burst. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake Lena's haunting words from my mind. I tried convincing myself it was just another one of her bizarre childhood phases, but her chilling conviction nagged at me incessantly. I started paying closer attention to the little things. Derek's mysterious late nights at the office, the expensive new gadgets he claimed were employee discounts, the obvious distance growing between us. It was like someone had ripped away the rose-tinted veil from my eyes. Finding the hotel receipt in his pants pocket was the final, irrefutable proof I needed. I felt like the biggest fool as everything clicked into place. Lena had been right all along about the affair. And if that was true, what about the stealing from his job? As I sat on the edge of our bed, the damning evidence in my hand, a sickening realization washed over me. My husband, the man I'd loved and trusted, had been living a reprehensible double life of deception right under my nose. Worst of all, my innocent little girl had seen the truth, while I remained willfully blind. Tears stung my eyes as I looked at the framed photo on the nightstand. An idyllic family snapshot taken just months ago, all smiles and blissful unawareness. Those days were over. My life as I knew it had already crumbled, leaving only the harsh reality of betrayal behind. With a deep, shuddering breath, I straightened my spine and pushed aside the grief momentarily. It was time to confront Derek and force the truth out into the open once and for all, no matter how much it shattered the delusion we'd been living. The fragile foundation of our family had fractured beyond repair, and there was no going back. As frightening as it was, I knew I had to be strong. If not for myself, then for Lena. She had been the one to courageously shed light on the ugly truth, and now it was my turn to face the consequences head-on. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, feeling like a detective investigating my own husband's sordid secrets. Lena's revelation had opened the floodgates, and now everything seemed laced with Derek's lies, his business trips, the unfamiliar numbers constantly lighting up his phone, even the pungent smell of another woman's perfume clinging to his clothes. Finally, I decided it was time to confront him. One night after Lena was tucked in bed, I steeled myself and headed to the living room where Derek was watching TV, my hands trembling with the damning evidence. "Who is she?" I demanded, tossing the hotel receipt onto his lap. Derek's eyes widened in shock before narrowing suspiciously. "Where did you get this?" "That's not an answer," I shot back, my voice rising. "I want the truth, Derek. Who are you sleeping with behind my back?" He opened his mouth, but I cut him off, throwing the crumpled lingerie receipt I'd found in his gym bag at him. "And this? Some kind of sick joke?" "Elise, you're overreacting," he sputtered unconvincingly as I paced back and forth like a caged tiger. "It's not what it looks like." "Don't you dare try to lie to me," I exploded, fury and hurt raging through me. "Lena knew, Derek. She told me weeks ago that you were cheating and stealing from your job. I didn't believe her at first, but now—" I trailed off bitterly. Derek's face contorted in anger. Are you seriously going to take the word of a child over your own husband? A child who was telling the truth. I shot back, hot tears streaming down my cheeks. While I've been blinded this whole time, stupidly believing in the perfect family act you've been selling. In that moment, I thought Derek might strike me with the way his fists clenched and rage flashed in his eyes. Instead, he abruptly stood, towering over me with clenched jaw. You want the truth? He growled darkly. Fine. Yes, I've been having an affair with Jessica from accounting. And yes, I've been skimming money from the dealership finances to fund my little fling and all her expensive tastes. There, I admitted it. His vile confession hung thick in the air as I stared at him, sickened revulsion roiling in the pit of my stomach. This was the real Derek, the monster who had been lurking behind the facade of loving husband and devoted father. How could you? I whispered, choking back a sob. How could you do this to Lena and me, to our whole family? Don't act so innocent, he shot back venomously. You've been too caught up in your own little world with work and Lena to pay any attention to me. A man has needs, Elise. I recoiled in disgust at his twisted rationalization. This man was no longer the Derek I thought I knew and loved. He was a vile, repulsive stranger. Lena's cries suddenly rang out from her bedroom, no doubt awakened by our raised voices. With a last look of pure loathing at the despicable creature before me, I whirled and hurried down the hall to my daughter. In that moment, it was clear. Derek's deceit and abusive nature left me no choice but to burn that bridge completely. He had shattered the sacred bonds of family through his selfish transgressions. Now it was up to me to protect Lena at all costs from the fallout of her father's unforgivable actions. As I pulled my sobbing little girl into my arms, I silently vowed that Derek would face the consequences for the devastation he had wrought upon our lives. If unbridled karma was coming for him, I would be the instrument to unleash its ultimate reckoning. The next few days were a tense, toxic powder keg in our home. Derek tried to go about his routine as if nothing had happened, but I could see the guilt and strain etched on his face. I refused to so much as look at him, my insides twisting with disgust and hatred every time he entered the room. Lena seemed to pick up on the suffocating atmosphere, sticking close to my side with a quiet wariness. She didn't ask for more details about that awful night. She didn't need to. The invisible fissure cracking through our family unit was plain for all to see. One evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Derek blustered in, that same arrogant sneer plastered on his face. We need to talk about this rationally, he announced without preamble. You're blowing this whole thing out of proportion. I whirled on him, brandishing the kitchen knife as if it could physically erase him from my life. Out of proportion? I echoed in disbelief. You cheated on me. You stole from your own company to fund your sleazy affair. How am I supposed to just accept that? Keep your voice down, he hissed, shooting a nervous glance towards the living room where Lena was watching TV. You're going to upset Lena. I'm going to upset her? I cried, incredulous rage bubbling up within me. That's rich coming from the man who destroyed this family with his repulsive lies and actions. Lena, of course, had heard the commotion and came padding in, her eyes wide with worry and a hint of that same unnerving knowingness. Mommy, what's going on? Nothing, Princess. Derek rushed out in a placating tone that made me want to vomit. Daddy and Mommy are just having a little disagreement, that's all. Don't you dare lie to her again, I exploded, throwing the knife down with a clatter. I grabbed Lena and pulled her protectively into my arms. Your father has been cheating on me with another woman and stealing money from his job. The truth is finally out. Derek's face darkened with fury as Lena gasped. You stupid butch, you had to go and tell her? Before I could react, he had crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, his hand raised to strike me. I flinched, bracing for the blow as Lena cried out in terror. Suddenly, Derek froze, his arms still raised as if an invisible force held him in place. His face contorted in hatred as he stared down at Lena, who was glaring at him with uncanny intensity despite her tears. Don't you dare hurt my mom, she said in a low, trembling voice laced with power. I warned you this would happen, Dad. I told you your lies would catch up to you. Well, now everyone knows what a horrible person you really are. In that moment, it was like all the fight went out of Derek. His arm dropped limply to his side as he took a staggering step back, a flicker of fear in his eyes as he beheld his own young daughter. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the kitchen, disappearing upstairs as the tension crackled in the air. I clutched Lena tightly. tears streaming down my cheeks as the reality set in. The man I had once loved and built a family with had just tried to strike me in front of our child. That night, as I lay awake with Lena tucked against me in the guest bedroom, I knew there was no going back. Derek's abusive outburst had irrevocably severed any remaining threads holding our family together. I could no longer live under the same roof as that monstrous, violent stranger for both safety and Lena's. It was time to formulate an escape plan, no matter how afraid or uncertain I felt. Derek's cruelty and depravity knew no bounds. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. If there was any flicker of love left for the man he used to be, it was permanently extinguished, smothered by the ashes of his morally bankrupt actions. As I stroked Lena's soft hair, I felt a steely determination harden within me. That twisted, wicked man may have tried to cow me through intimidation, but he had underestimated the ferocious protectiveness of a mother's love. I would do whatever it took to shelter Lena from his toxic, vile influence and hold him accountable for his unforgivable betrayal, even if I had to burn our lives to the ground to make it happen. The next morning, I awoke with a pounding headache and a heavy sense of dread weighing me down. Lena was still sleeping peacefully beside me, her face angelic in contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. I slipped out of bed, my heart hammering as I tiptoed past the bedroom Derek and I had once shared. The house was eerily silent. He must have already left for work, no doubt eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere. In the kitchen, I busied myself making Lena's favorite pancakes, desperately trying to cling to some sense of normalcy. But my hands were shaking so badly, I ended up burning the first batch. As if on cue, Lena shuffled in, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Morning, Mommy." I quickly plastered on a reassuring smile. "Good morning, sweetie. How about we go out for breakfast instead?" Her eyes brightened at the suggestion, and she nodded enthusiastically. Small blessings, I thought wryly. At least I could still make her happy, despite our fractured family circumstances. After we were dressed, I gathered my purse and took a steadying breath. Time to face my new reality head-on. First stop was the bank, where I gingerly asked about our account balances with trepidation. To my dismay and rising panic, I discovered Derek had systematically drained almost every cent into his own private slush fund, leaving us with virtually nothing to our names. "That lying, thieving snake," I hissed through gritted teeth, the anger and hurt nearly choking me. Lena, thank goodness, was momentarily distracted at a picture book in the kids' corner. I took a few calming breaths, trying to process this latest unconscionable violation. Derek had not only shattered my heart and trust, he had potentially left us destitute and homeless. How could I ever have predicted the depths of his cruelty and depraved indifference towards me and his own daughter? "Mom?" Lena's small voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. "What's wrong?" I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat as despair threatened to overwhelm me. How could I possibly explain the full extent of Derek's repugnant actions to my child? Taking her small hand in mine, I forced a watery smile. "It's going to be okay, sweetie. We're just going through some stuff with Dad right now, but I promise I'm going to take care of you no matter what." Her brow furrowed, that too wise gaze fixed on me. "He took all the money, didn't he? From our bank account." I could only nod mutely, not trusting myself to speak through the lump in my throat. To my surprise, Lena didn't seem shocked or upset, just terribly resigned, as if this was simply the latest inevitability to accept. "We need to get away from him," she stated firmly, squeezing my hand. "Dad's not the man we thought he was. He's dangerous." Her haunting words unlocked something inside me, allowing the cold reality to sink in completely. Derek's betrayal, his very essence, went deeper than I could have ever imagined. This was a profoundly broken, toxic person willing to inflict immeasurable pain and damage with no regard for anyone but himself. Staying in this house, in this life, would only enable his abusive behavior to continue escalating. I had to be the one to sever those ties completely for both our sakes before he dragged us down any further into his vortex of depravity. But how? I wondered desperately. He had cut off all our financial lifelines in his vindictive, pathetic clutches for control. Then, as if reading my anguished thoughts, Lena gave me that eerily prescient look. "Uncle Marcus can help us." My heart stuttered at the mention of my estranged older brother. Marcus and I hadn't spoken in years, ever since an argument over mine and Derek's whirlwind marriage drove a wedge between us. He profoundly distrusted Derek and warned me about rushing into things. I had been too blinded by love and naive optimism to listen. But now, with my world crashing down around me, thanks to the very man Marcus cautioned against, perhaps he was the only lifeline left to grab onto in this storm of turmoil. As much as it pained my pride to reach out, I didn't have any other choice, not if I wanted to find safe harbor for Lena and myself. Slowly, feeling like the world's biggest failure, I nodded. Okay, honey, we'll call Uncle Marcus and see if he can help us get away from your father. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they were also the first defiant, empowering steps towards protecting what mattered most. Derek's cruel stranglehold over us was about to slip, one way or another. I would do whatever it took to break free and face the karma that was barreling towards him like a runaway train. The drive to Marcus's place felt like the longest journey of my life. Lena was uncharacteristically quiet beside me, her small hand clutched tightly in mine, as if she knew the gravity of what we were about to do. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it thundering in my ears. Part of me still couldn't quite believe I was really going through with this, reaching out to the brother I had shut out of my life to escape the waking nightmare my marriage had become. When Marcus opened the door, I barely recognized him. His hair was graying at the temples and lined creased his once youthful face, aging him beyond his 40 years. For a long moment, we just stared at each other in stunned silence. Elise, what's... He trailed off, his brow furrowing as he seemed to really take us in, my haggard appearance, Lena's somber wariness. Come in, both of you. What's going on? I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat like shards of shattered glass. How could I possibly articulate the depths of betrayal and hurt? It's Dad, Lena spoke up, that eerie perception slicing through the tension. He's been cheating on Mom and stealing money from his job. We had to get away from him before it got worse. Marcus's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. That son of a butch, he bit out, slamming his fist against the doorframe hard enough to make me jump. I knew that snake couldn't be trusted from the moment you brought him around. Marcus, please? I finally found my voice, thick with unshed tears. We didn't know where else to go. Derek took everything, the money from our accounts, our savings, all of it. I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. We have nothing left because of him. To my surprise, Marcus immediately pulled me into a fierce hug, one I melted into despite my rigid shock. You did the right thing coming here, sis. I'm so sorry you've had to go through this hell, but I promise you and Lena are safe now. He released me, his eyes blazing with protective fire as he turned to my daughter. Hey, Lena, you've been a tough, brave girl through all this, haven't you? How would you like to pick out whichever guest room you want while your mom and I talk? Lena nodded solemnly, and Marcus ruffled her hair before she scampered off down the hallway. I found myself envious of her innocence, her ability to accept safety and shelter so readily without the emotional scars I now carried. Once she was out of earshot, Marcus rounded on me, his expression thunderous. Tell me everything that bastard did, and don't leave out a single damn detail. Like a festering wound finally being lanced, I unloaded it all to Marcus through harsh, ragged breaths. Derek's affair, his heartless financial crimes, his escalating abusive behavior, and finally his petty cruelty of draining our accounts in one last bid for control. No detail was spared. With each fresh atrocity, I watched helpless rage contort Marcus's features until he looked near violence by the end of my tale. That miserable, worthless piece of human filth, he spat acidly. To think I tried warning you about him all those years ago. I flinched, each word slicing into me like a knife's edge. I was so blind, Marcus, stupid and naive. All I cared about was the idea of the perfect family I thought we could be. I never really knew him at all. Marcus's expression softened fractionally as he placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You couldn't have seen this side of him coming. That kind of evil is rarely obvious until it's too late. The important thing now is you and Lena are away from that cesspool he created. I nodded mutely, too emotionally raw to speak further. Marcus seemed to understand, giving my shoulder a final reassuring squeeze. We'll get through this together, I promise, he stated, steely determination replacing his anger. That worm is going to face the consequences of all the lives he's destroyed, and I'll make sure of it myself if I have to. I felt a tiny spark of hope flicker through the engulfing grief and turmoil at his words. Marcus wouldn't just offer us shelter and safety. He was ready to fight for justice on our behalf, too. As he turned to draw up the paperwork for initiating divorce proceedings, I felt oddly fortified. like I had an anchor again to cling to through this relentless storm. Derek's miserable betrayal had shaken me to my core, yes, but it hadn't broken my spirit permanently. With Lena by my side and Marcus standing with us, that defiant part of me that first made me confront Derek reared its head once more. If karma was circling like a shark, I would do everything to help it shred that wretched man to ribbons for how he had tried to shatter and discard our family. It was time to excise Derek from our lives completely and unequivocally, and with the law and morality as my blade, I would make sure he felt the slash of justice with each and every repercussion to come. The weeks following our escape to Marcus's place were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and mounting evidence against Derek. With Marcus leading the charge, it was like a dam had burst open. Every deplorable transgression, every slimy misdeed of my husband's had come gushing out into the light. I found myself downloading bank statements, digging up incriminating receipts and emails, recounting in harsh detail the timeline of Derek's escalating abuse. Each new revelation felt like another twist of the knife in my back, another con he had perpetrated against my trust and our family. At the same time, there was a perverse sense of exhilaration pulsing through me, fueled by the knowledge that the dominoes of karma were finally starting to topple around Derek's wretched existence. Through it all, Lena remained steadfastly by my side, her quiet strength and solemnity carrying me forward when the anguish threatened to overwhelm me. My little girl, robbed of her innocence by her own father's reprehensible conduct, was handling the fallout with more grace and resilience than I could have ever imagined. Finally, the day of the emergency custody hearing arrived, with Derek being summoned to face the full, damning brunt of his sins in court. I had spent agonizing hours preparing with Marcus, steeling myself to recount the worst moments under oath in front of that abusive, scornful glare. Yet when Derek finally entered the courtroom, it wasn't belligerent hatred that burned in his eyes, but naked fear. He looked shrunken, cowed, as if grasping the colossal weight of consequences bearing down upon him at last. It was strange, almost jarring, to watch the arrogant swagger leach out of him under the scrutiny of the impartial justice system. Marcus wasted no time in ruthlessly dismantling every aspect of his guise, painting him as the liar, the adulterer, the embezzler he truly was through an incontrovertible mountain of evidence. I was grateful for the opportunity to hide behind a legal buffer as the sordid specifics of Derek's deceit were laid bare for all to see. With each revelation, I watched him wilt a little more, the facade cracking until he could no longer meet anyone's gaze. When it was my turn to testify, to describe in explicit detail his explosive rage, his threats and toxic manipulation, I found I no longer feared him. Sitting there on the stand, I felt nothing but contemptuous revulsion for this shriveled, pathetic shell of a man before me. I spoke the truth calmly, clinically, laying out the facts of how he had terrorized Lena and me in pursuit of sating his selfish vices. By the time it was Derek's turn to testify, it was almost painful to watch his feeble, squirming attempts to salvage some credibility, respect, or shred of sympathy from the courtroom audience. His words rang as hollow and empty as his moral character, lies dribbling from his lips that no one would ever believe. The final nail in his coffin came when Lena took the stand, recounting in chilling detail her preternatural forewarnings about his despicable behavior, how she had tried to shield me from the truth to no avail. Seeing Derek visibly shrink away from his own young daughter's testimony, it was a damning indictment of his utter lack of redemptive qualities. By the end, the judge looked utterly disgusted as he rendered his rulings. Full custody awarded to me, Derek's legal avalanche of punitive fines, asset seizures, and possible criminal charges still to come. As he was led from the courtroom, Derek finally met my gaze with naked hatred blazing in his eyes, his mouth twisted into a silent snarl of malice. But I felt nothing but cold indifference towards this crumpled, petty villain who had tried to grapple Lena and me into the depths of his depravity. Stripped of his power and pretense, he was simply a cautionary example of the monster waiting within those driven by lust, greed, and ego. As Lena slipped her small hand into mine, I drew strength and pride from her courage in the face of her own father's repugnance. We had won, not just a legal victory, but a reclamation of our lives from his toxic, oppressive reach. A chapter had been closed, but more importantly, a new one was just beginning. No longer would Derek's shadow hang over us, leeching away happiness with his poisonous mendacity. We were free to start anew on our own terms, whatever the future held. As Marcus pulled us both into a fierce embrace, his eyes were shining not with triumph but with admiration. "You two are the real heroes here today," he murmured gruffly. "Derek's pathetic ego is what sealed his downfall in the end." I realized then with a sense of clarity that the karma delivered upon Derek wasn't one of fiery vengeance, but a cold, harsh light illuminating the festering ugliness he had tried so hard to conceal. The true punishment was forcing him to confront and be judged for the man he had ultimately chosen to become through his soulless choices. Looking into Lena's guileless eyes, I felt an overwhelming surge of love and gratitude. She had tried to steer us away from that path of destruction from the very beginning. And now, by her resilient side, I vowed to ensure we would both keep walking the higher path towards hope, love, and rebirth. Derek's wretched, karmic downfall was complete. All that was left was to embrace the freedom he had so selfishly tried to leech away and forge ahead into a new dawn brilliantly free of his toxic, dimming influence. In the aftermath of Derek's legal reckoning, it was like a vortex had opened up, swallowing the last remnants of the life we had known. With cold, brutal efficiency, the consequences of his actions just kept mounting. First, there was the swift and merciless termination from his job at the car dealership, the final severing of his financial lifeline now that his embezzlement schemes had been dragged into the harsh light of day. I had to repress a mirthless chuckle at the thought of all his smug posturing around that fancy corner office going up in flames thanks to his own rapacious greed. Next was the unraveling of his tawdry affair with that woman from accounting, Jessica. I'll never forget the smug, self-satisfied look on Marcus's face as he relayed the news that the mistress had kicked Derek to the curb, no doubt looking to preserve what scraps of her own reputation she could. "Rats fleeing a sinking ship," he had remarked with a cruel smile. "Derek won't have anyone left in his corner after this is through." Derek tried to see Lena, of course. Desperate phone calls, increasingly threatening voicemails, all pleading for a chance to explain himself, to fix things. As if his daughter's innocence and implicit trust in him hadn't been one of his biggest casualties. "Please, Mom," Lena had whispered brokenly after one particularly vile message. "I don't want to see him or talk to him ever again. He's not my dad anymore." Those words, spoken through such a wounded child's perspective, cemented my resolve. Marcus swiftly petitioned for a permanent restraining order, ensuring that not only could Derek never go near Lena, he couldn't so much as set foot on Marcus's property where we had taken refuge. I relished the moment Marcus came swaggering back with the official court papers, that predatory grin plastered on his face as he presented them. "This ensures he can't come sniffing around again, trying to manipulate you or Lena," he announced in a tone dripping with satisfaction. "One step over the line and I'll have his ass hauled off to jail so fast it'll make his head spin." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I had exhaled a full breath, the first inhale of true freedom from Derek's toxic reach. Lena responded by plastering herself to my side, burying her tear-stained face against me as relief washed over us both in waves. At long last, his power to inflict more torment and trauma had been stripped completely away. He was little more than a shriveled, feeble shell of a human being now, pathetically thrashing against the bars of justice as the world looked on with contempt. The final, most brutal karma blow came in the form of those punitive fines and financial penalties raining down from every direction. Massive restitution to me, wage garnishing, asset forfeiture, you name it. Not just for the embezzlement, mind you, but calculated damages for his outrageous violations within our marriage. It was a ruinous legal Armageddon of fiscal accountability that had reduced Derek, the big-shot dealership manager, to flat broke and drowning in debt. I actually found myself giggling out loud when Marcus forwarded the statement documenting my vengeful asshole of an ex-husband's updated net worth, less than zero, a lifetime of earnings and pension pissed away, thanks to his greed and depravity. For so many years, Derek had been the smug, arrogant financial breadwinner. At least, that was the ego-stroking facade he hid behind as he cheated and stole and gaslit those closest to him into acceptance of his lies. Now that was all stripped away too, laid to waste by the sword of judicial roasting he so richly deserved. Marcus took particularly sadistic glee in taunting him with attachments of foreclosure notices and bankruptcy filings, punishment for the fear and destitution he had inflicted upon Lena and me in that sick power play of draining our own accounts. This is what happens to self-entitled pricks who think they can have everything at the expense of others, he had snarled vindictively. I'll savor every minute of his hard-earned downfall into abject poverty. And Derek, increasingly pathetic and diminished, had no choice but to writhe on that karmic skewer as the flames of accountability licked away every ill-gotten remnant of his former life. It was almost beautiful justice in a way. The cocky, faithless husband who had thrown it all away in pursuit of basal vice now had nothing left but the hollowness of his choices staring back at him. As for Lena and me, the healing had at last begun in earnest, with Derek cut out of our lives like the terminal cancer he had become. There would still be scars to confront, trauma to process, but no longer would it be compounded by his vile, toxic presence looming in the shadows. Marcus was with us every step of the way, the older brother truly acting as the guardian I needed to finally break free and forge a new path forward with my resilient, extraordinary daughter at my side. Together, we savored those first few emancipated breaths of liberation from Derek's depravity, ready to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of everything he had destroyed around himself.